Today on Schrödinger's Dungeon, we're going to talk about defining the playstyle for your game group. Then, we'll dive into questions that have come up in your campaigns.
Let's unbox that.
So, playstyle. It's an important part of any role-playing game, and it's going to differ from group to group and from game to game. So one group that's playing Dungeons & Dragons might play games completely differently if they're diving into something that's lighter, like Teenagers from Outer Space or Toon. And again, it might be very different if they're playing a game of Call of Cthulhu. And it's important when you're setting up your group and choosing your campaign to make sure that everybody's on board for that play style.
There has been so many groups that have fallen apart just because of this issue that we're talking about today, because you have one player who wants to play a very serious type of game and another player who wants to just be really goofy all the time, which is fine in its own right, but they start to butt heads quite a bit. And if you can get a group together and right off the bat be like, look, we're all here to have fun. As we always say, this is about fun. This is what you want to do. This is your escape from the reality of the world. We want fun, but the overall arc of how you want to play the game is extremely important to make sure that everybody is in agreement about that arc.
Absolutely. I mean, and I've run into games. I've even been the player who completely misread the table and thought, oh, we're not playing this as seriously as I thought we were. It happens sometimes. It's okay that it happens sometimes, but it's better if you can address it early on, because you're going to avoid some awkward situations.
And over time, you'll avoid also resentment amongst the group.
Oh, absolutely.
If you have one person that's coming there and really is disruptive, like you have a vibe with everybody else, and you have one, maybe two players that are really disruptive, it's nothing will kill a story or a gaming group faster than dissension within
and
the people.
It's
playing.
important when you bring somebody into your group to kind of discuss the way you guys play. Because it can be really jarring if somebody's been in a group where, say, their style of play was very tactical, and so a lot of their gameplay was focused around how they were moving their miniatures around during a combat, as opposed to a group that was doing everything theater of the mind and maybe had, a little more flexibility with the rules. Neither of those styles are bad, right? They're both completely okay, totally valid ways to play the game. There are no game police that are going to come around to you and say, no, this is how you have to do it. But it's really helpful to discuss that with everybody and make sure you're all on the same page.
And moreover, it's also not just mechanic-wise, like you're saying. There are some people who just want to roll dice and not really get into the immersion of being your character, more along the lines of, and I've had a lot of players who have done this before, where they're there, they like the combat aspect, they roll a die, I hit something, I did this damage, and then I have others who roll the die and then describe what happened, and it's not just I hit him for 6 points of damage, I personally, I always like more narrative stuff, not a long-winded 3-minute soliloquy on how you hit somebody for 4 points of damage, but something more exciting than just you roll a die, hit him in the arm, and I do 3 points of damage.
Sure. And there's actually a number of different elements to play style. Another one I would like to talk about is how the campaign is focused, whether it's going to be plot driven, meaning the game master has this big story that they want to tell, and the characters are going to be a part of that story, no matter what. And if they deviate from that story, the game master has no idea what to do.
Chugga.
Absolutely. That's the archetypical railroad style of story.
Yes.
And the other extreme is the game master doesn't really have a whole lot of plot in mind and just says, oh, yeah, you guys are in this town. What do you want to do?
Yeah. The sandbox versus the railroad.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And those are, again, both totally valid. And often you're not going to go to one extreme or the other. But it's really helpful for players to have some idea which extreme the game master is going to go to, so that they're not missing, the obvious railroad tracks and trying to fight their way to avoid them.
Right.
Or they're not, looking for those railroad tracks desperately when the game master doesn't have a train in the story.
And to get on that point a little more, know your group. I have had people run games. When Vampire the Requiem first came out, a friend of mine, because we all played a lot of White Wolf in the mid to late 90s. We loved Vampire the Masquerade. And when the Requiem came out, we're like, all right, we'll give it a try. And it was a friend of ours who hadn't GM'd before. And he had this, it was a great story. But the problem was, it was a novel. It wasn't something that you would interact with. It was him dictating to you what was happening.
Sure.
And after a few sessions, we're like, look, man, we're not even playing right now. We have characters, but you tell us what happens, and it almost doesn't matter what we do.
Yeah, you've got a frustrated novelist or screenwriter who's your game master, and there are people who do enjoy that.
Yes.
But that's very much what you're describing is a common situation where the players and the game masters have a real disconnect on their play style, and it needs to be communicated earlier on so you don't get into that situation.
And the big thing about railroads and sandboxes is also how the rules interact with that type of GMing style. Some games lend themselves very well to railroading, and some games are just a sandbox game no matter what you do to them.
Sure. And I mean, we've talked about games in the past like Fate and the Dresden Files, particular iteration of that, where you spend a lot of time building up the city where the story is going to happen. And everybody's collaborating on that, right? And that feeds into a kind of a sandboxy feel because each player has set up an element within the town that they're invested in, and by proxy, their character is invested in. And so that, again, that gets into that whole kind of a feel where you're collaboratively telling a story, as opposed to, the more archetypical railroad, where the game master has this adventure that everything is dictated by the book that he already bought, and you're going to follow that plot.
Right. It's very different playing The Curse of Strahd from D&D as opposed to what you were saying with the Dresden Files. And again, though, you also want to get the right players in to do that. Like, if you have people who really do like creating a lot of story, you want to shy away from playing, or at least altering, a pre-published book to suit those needs a little better. And on the flip side, if you have a player who really isn't as strong in the storytelling aspect, a lot of times that could lead to them being like, you know what, I'm not really getting much out of this game because everybody else has more of a say. I don't really have the skin in the game, as it were. So it is important to get a consensus of the group and just be like, hey, what type of game do you guys like? Is this going to be a little more serious? Obviously, you're going to have goofy moments and fun times and stuff like that. It's not like you're going to sit down, because if you treat this like a job, you obviously are missing the point of gaming. But you will want to be like, look, I kind of want a more serious game, one where it's going to deal with these types of, like from the last session, it's going to deal with this type of material, these types of things, and it lends itself to a more serious tone to the investigation or to the plot of the game, as opposed to like, we're going to play Kobolds Ate My Baby and just have fun. Yeah,
and that's all about the pitch, right? And it's, to a certain extent, it's a matter of knowing your audience, and that can be difficult if the folks are people who haven't played many games before, because they may be coming into it with an expectation that certain things are going to happen at every table, because that's what has happened in the past, or, this may be their first time playing, and so they're not even sure what part of a role-playing game session they're really going to enjoy. So that, again, that complicates things, but you still need to give them a pitch and give them some fair degree of insight into what's going to be happening in the game.
Another aspect of all of that, though, is also, because you brought up with new gamers. You have gamers that have been playing with some groups for a long time, and there's a certain dynamic that they've picked up over these many, many years of playing together. And it just becomes second nature that they think every role-playing group plays this way.
Absolutely.
This is what I'm used to. I've been playing role-playing for, 10 years or whatever, or I'm in my, close to 30 years of role-playing.
You noob.
I've been fortunate enough to have a lot of different groups that I've played in or GM'd for or what have you. And it's always interesting to see like a group that has played together for a long time, and you bring in something new, like me running the game instead of their regular GM who's now playing, and to see the dynamic change that they have. And it's really weird to them when you bring in a new player, and it's kind of like, I don't want to say the fly in the ointment type of thing, but it really, be prepared for it, because it's just second nature for people to become comfortable with each other and have this one way of playing, and then another person to come in and completely, like you said, blindside them to a different way of playing. But all in all, you can make it work. It's sometimes a little more difficult, but you can make it. And some of the most rewarding games I've played have had very diverse, different game groups together.
And one of my favorite things to do in that regard is just playing games at cons where you're sometimes you'll get 5 people that show up that have been gaming together for years, and they just show up at the table and say, we're going to try something completely new. And they've all got their predefined ways of interacting with each other, and you as the game master need to work with that. And other times you get 6 people who have never even met each other before, and so you're kind of trying to feel out what they're looking for in the game as you're running it, which can be, a fun exercise as the game master, and it's teaching you to adapt. I've always enjoyed doing that. I don't know how much of that you've done.
I, many years ago, would go to Gen Con quite a bit in Origins, and sitting down at a table with, like you said, 6 to 12 other people, and just for a 6-hour block of gaming, it's just really, sometimes it's really fun, because you're meeting new people. Everybody's obviously into the same stuff, so you all have that in common already. And most people have a good social contract. Most gamers have a good social contract between each other. But yeah, it is neat to see how other people play, just because you are used to your own gaming group. And running those types of games too is really fun, just because you are now interacting with a bigger pool of people that you normally wouldn't be interacting with. And you get to pick up on, wow, this, you come across new challenges all the time.
Sure.
And it really helps.
And I think it's neat when you talk about Gen Con and Origins, there's 30,000 people at those shows. You may see somebody once and never see them again in your lifetime. Some of the smaller shows are also neat because you'll see some people at them year after year, right, if you keep coming back to them, which can also be a neat experience where you've got this kind of shared background of stories. Yeah. But when you're setting up those tables, if you're pitching an event or when people start to sit down at it, again, this can be useful to touch on playstyle elements, and it can be useful to make sure that people have a common terminology. If you say, this is going to be a rules-focused game versus a story-driven game, or if you say this is going to be a character-driven game versus a plot-driven game, those have different meanings, and it's really helpful for everybody to be on the same page with those kinds of things.
It's all prep work. Really, these first podcasts that we've been having this is stuff that you're going to be doing before you even set down to roll dice, and all this stuff will help you run a game successfully. Because that's as a GM of any ilk, that's what you want. You have this great idea. At least I can only speak for myself. I have a great idea. I read something, I get inspired, I write it down. I have little plot points and bullets, and I'm like, this would make a great story for a game. What system would it work for? Okay, now I got to find people who want to, because that's what you want to do. You're creating something, just like a musician or an artist or whatever. You want to share your creation with other people and have them enjoy it. So that make sure that can happen. Talking with your prospective players off the rip, and unfortunately, sometimes you'll have to weed out people who just don't share the same vibe or whatever, and that's fine too. But getting the right group can make a game successful, or only 2 sessions. More than any other, it doesn't matter about story or system or any of that. It's having the right people sit down together to enjoy an evening of losing themselves into a fantasy world. That, by and far, is what you are striving to do. And this little bit of prep work, and it's not much. We're not saying make a dissertation and have a conference about, like, you should just sit down and go over some things. Like, I want this type of game, these types of rules with this system. It's going to bring up this type of subject matter, and this is kind of how I like more serious or whatever type of game. Simple as that. That took me 30 seconds to spit out.
And I think that's exactly the kind of stuff you want to talk about in your session 0.
Yes.
I did like your analogy a lot about it being art, because these are kind of different art styles, And it's neat to be able to move between them and to run your campaign using different styles. So when you pick a different rule system, that's kind of like the palette that you're working with. And then the, expression of how much characters control things versus how much they're, going through a GM experience is, basically stylistic choices as you're developing things.
Yeah.
And
based on the rules, it could be like a different medium altogether. Dungeons and Dragons is like sculpting, whereas, a more open type of game like All Flesh Must Be Eaten is more like sketching,
Absolutely. But I think having flexibility in your play style from campaign to campaign can be great. And sometimes even within a campaign, it's neat to have an adventure that may focus on a slightly different play style. A lot like, even a TV series will do one episode that's a completely different style. The easiest reference are, when Buffy or The Flash did their musical episode. It was completely different. Yeah.
It was awesome.
It was hysterical, but it was really cool because it was so different from what had come before. So occasionally having that adventure or game session that delves into a different play style should be okay, but maybe let your group know something different's coming.
Or even having something that's not every session also has to have like apocalyptic type of plot lines to it. There are sometimes, especially with like the best example I can come up with is Shadowrun, where I had a GM. They had the group I was in. We were switching GMs, and the one session we had a run that just went according to plan. We planned it out. We plotted it out. There was no one was trying to screw us over. There was no weird megacorp. We just did the run, and at the end of it, it was like, wow, that was a little refreshing. Like we weren't getting. It wasn't your typical Shadowrun game, but it was really fun. Just like always, coming up with a idea of how you're going to do this and a plan and everything, and then when it all went off, it's like, oh yeah, okay, you guys get paid. What? No one's trying to kill us? No, you guys got paid. You did what you were supposed to. And like I said, like you just said, it was something different, still in the same vein, just like I love Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So like that musical thing or the one where they don't speak at all.
Sure.
Those are iconic shows because everybody remembers them because of their difference.
Yeah. The last thing I want to touch on play style is just make sure that it's working for everybody past that initial session 0, right? So as the game goes on, maybe every 3 or 4 sessions, have 5-10 minutes after you're done playing to chat about it. Make sure everybody's having fun. Make sure everybody's comfortable with the game style. If people are confused about the way that play is working, this gives them an opportunity to ask questions. Sometimes, if they're sufficiently confused, they'll ask during a session, which is totally fine. But, if things are starting to build up, take that time to discuss things, potentially defuse a situation you might not even have been aware was there. And that's how you get longevity with a group, by talking through these things and making sure everybody's on the same page and making sure everybody's having fun. And if people aren't having fun or they are confused, make sure you talk through it and set things up so that both the players and the game master can change as needed. Flexibility is your watchword here.
Yeah. And that just hints on one more thing. If you're going to run a game, know the rules. Now, that doesn't mean you have to know everything by heart, but at least
I still
index
don't
your rule
know
book.
how the Dungeons and Dragons grappling rules work, and I never will.
Yeah, I mean, but the main rules, I've always have little post-it tabs that I put on my rule books. So just be familiar with the rule set. There's nothing worse than everybody diving into a rule book trying to figure it out. It's just, know the rules, basically, is all I'm saying. If you're going to run something, do your due diligence and at least know what it is you're going to run. Not just the story, but the actual meat and potatoes of how you're going to accomplish that story. Because, again, if you have people that haven't played the game before, they're going to have a ton of questions. And if you are just as confused as they are, it's not going to be a very fun experience because it's just confusion.
Absolutely. So, Mikey, you have any questions for us?
I actually have a few questions for you guys. I don't know if you guys are ready for this.
All right.
Let's give it a shot.
All right. Well, let's just say another, hypothetical. I have a friend of mine and I want to run a game with multiple groups in a shared campaign world, but, they're competitive with one another. Do you have any advice for that?
So I've played in games like that, and I've actually run a couple along those lines. I don't know if you've done anything in this vein, Nate.
I'll let you take. I'll throw in my 2 cents afterwards because I think it might be a little different than yours.
Okay. So I played in a game in college and I didn't realize this was happening, but our characters were the good party, and another game master was simultaneously running the evil party, and we were both trying to finish this quest. And with obviously different objectives in mind. And we'd been playing for about 9 months before we had the big culminating session where there were suddenly 12 people in the room with 2 game masters telling us that we were fighting each other. It was a really cool campaign. I had a lot of fun with it. It was a heck of a bombshell to drop on us at the end of it. And maybe I was the only one that was oblivious to it, but I don't think so. And that worked out really well. But the reason it worked out really well was because there was constant communication between the game masters, and they were sharing everything that happened in each game session. And that right there is the big thing to keep in mind, because if the game masters aren't running things at a comparable pace, your timeline gets disrupted. And so one group could reach the critical point 3 sessions earlier than the other one, and then what do you do? So you've got to make sure that things are very clearly delineated from an early stage, and that both game masters are, working at a comparable pace. I've also, like I said, been in the situation where I was running a campaign with a couple of groups simultaneously, with another game master running the other group, and we ran into a problem where we both knew what was happening, but my group was getting through things faster than his group was. And so we had to go, okay, well, my group can't play this week then, because otherwise we're going to advance the story too fast. And it was an issue. And again, that's just the kind of thing you need to figure it out, because the in-game issues then caused scheduling issues. And eventually that campaign died an early death, but it happens.
Rest in peace.
Yeah.
So it was excellent what you just said, because the first one that you were talking about, that's the type of competition you want to have. When they say competition, I have one party that they know they're going to be playing amoral or evil characters, and another party that they know they're going to be playing, the more good party or whatever. And they don't know about each other. I mean, that's a great plot point. But even if they did, you had that set up to begin with, and that is a good way of doing a competitive against each other. On the other hand, if you are thinking of having 2 groups that want the same goal and they're competing with each other to get to that same goal, don't do that.
Yeah.
Don't have people be competitive in a game with this. Like the example of, you have an evil party that has their own objectives and a good party that has their own objectives, and they're foiling each other. That's one thing. It's different to say, like, I'll go back to Shadowrun. I have 2 Shadowrun groups that have this same run that they have to do, and now they're competing against each other. That does not lend itself very well.
For that kind of setup, you need to be playing in real time. You need to have both game masters talking to each other, probably over a phone or some kind of headset. And you really have to have very strict time limits on when each thing can happen, because they may end up in combat at the same time.
Yes.
You guys ready for another one?
Yes.
Well, I was going to ask you guys, how do you like to teach players, like a new system, like how to run things, basically?
You want to start this one?
Yeah. So, because I've had to do this quite often, actually. When you start running a new system, the first thing as a GM that you need to do is, if you know none of your players know the game, then you need to know the game as well as you can. If it's a new game to you, spend that extra time to really figure out how the meat and potatoes of the game. You don't need to know everything, but then have a one-off game with pre-generated characters. That's a bit of a railroad.
No, pre-gens is the most important part.
Right. Make interesting pre-generated characters that have a good part of the plot, so that the players are going to be involved and basically be like, here you go, here you go, here you go, here you go. These are your characters. Or I like not even telling them anything except the name. And then they just grab that character and read the background that I put in there, have the pre-generated character, and you just start them right into it. You don't start with them making a character.
No,
Don't
that is
start with
the
any of
worst
that.
possible choice.
Start with a pre-generated character with a game that you already have, either something that's already published that you're going to do, or something that you've done all original, but know the system, pre-generated characters, and that way you can take them through how the game works while playing the game. And I think of all the ways that I've tried to teach people new systems, that has always been the most successful. In fact, the Aliens game that Free League
that
Press
you
put
ran
out.
for us.
Right.
Yeah, it was a good time.
Nobody in that room except me had ever seen the inside of that rule book, and by the end of it, you guys were making your own roles. It was you have figured out how to play your characters, and based off of that, it was a successful session in my opinion.
And there are a lot of RPGs out there now that have boxed starter sets that are ideal for doing this kind of thing. Dungeons and Dragons has one. Pathfinder has one. Call of Cthulhu has one that's about to be reprinted. Aliens, I believe, has one.
Yes.
All 3 Star Wars game lines have them. I'm pretty sure Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay now has one.
Yes.
In fact, I think I just saw it on the shelf the other day when I was looking through stuff. These are out there. Most of them have the characters pre-generated. The adventure is explicitly spelled out for a new game master. They're perfect for that. Some systems even have free quick starts that you can download off of their website or off of a site like DriveThruRPG, where you can get it and print it out, and it's just good to go. And it's a great way to get your feet wet with a new system. The biggest thing in my mind, once you make sure the game master has a solid grasp on it, is again having pre-generated characters so that the players can just sit down, look at a sheet where there are numbers that don't mean anything to them, and figure them out as you're telling the story and playing the game.
But with the pre-gen characters also, I will normally create a cheat sheet off to the side. Like if they have these skills, I will be, okay, this, for each character. So it does take a lot more prep work on the GM's part. But like this character has mechanics. Okay, this is what that means.
Yeah, usually with the starter sets,
Right.
that will also be explicitly spelled out.
Yes. But yeah, that's the best way. Sitting down and just having them roll characters and trying to go over the minutiae of the rules, not good. Sit down,
I'm
get immersed.
shaking my
boom.
head no. I agree with you. That is it. There is nothing more frustrating than trying to create a character on the fly in a tight time frame for a game system that you don't understand.
Well, speaking of that, like, what would you do if you're running a game? Say I'm running a game about astronauts, and my players don't know enough about what their characters do. How would you help fight that immersion or, that misunderstanding?
Well, I guess where that's going to go is going to come back to a storytelling question, because how important is that knowledge for the story to happen? I think, and sometimes the easy answer is just going to be, they're just going to kind of roll the dice and hopefully they're going to have the astronaut skill or whatever is most relevant there. And you can just tell them things happen. A lot of times, in entertainment, they're not going to spend 45 minutes on guys putting spacesuits on because it's not interesting.
Yeah.
Or, going through, if they're doing training to be an astronaut or any kind of complex field like that, they're not going to show, 17 hours of classwork. They're going to show a montage. And I, as a game master, will narrate a montage.
And I think this also points off to, I guess the way I interpreted the question was more along the lines of, this is a new group. They don't know the actual rules of the game yet, and they're not quite sure what skills, attributes, or what to take to make the character that they're looking to get. Kind of,
Okay, sure.
I want to be an
Yeah,
astronaut,
that could
but
be the case.
What skills do I need to take? What attributes are so? Again, as a GM, knowing the game helps out a lot. But also, and I do this with a lot of games that I know are going to be longer campaigns. And I would say, okay, first 4 sessions, you're pretty much going to get into your whole skill set in those first 4 sessions. If you want to flip around a few things, like when I played Vampire or something, if you want to move around a few dots from here to here or
Oh,
whatever, in the first 4 sessions, that's fine. You know, you can't be like, oh, I'm going to drop this, take this, take this, take this, you know, and I don't want min-maxing, but if you make, you know, a character that's supposed to be, let's say, a great mechanic, but you have no idea what skills would make a great mechanic, and you pick what you thought would be right, but if it ends up not, you know, not being as relevant as you thought, be like, no, this one's more relevant. Okay, you do that.
And in fairness, that can, going back to playstyle, be something the game master may want to mention during character creation. For instance, if I'm running a adventure that has strong investigative elements, I'm going to tell my players, you should probably consider taking the notice skill or the perception skill, whatever that skill is within that system, and maybe the evidence analysis or the detective or the forensic skill, because these are going to be particularly relevant to this campaign, and I'm going to make you roll that a lot.
Right. And everybody should, if it's always, and this is just a little bit of advice, if you're going to run an investigative game, do not just have one guy who specializes in that. Everybody should, because then it will start to feel like my character really doesn't do much except for this. My character doesn't do much except, you know, you're always going to have the one person who's like, I'm the warrior, and the other one's like, I'm this, I'm that, you know, that will happen. But a lot of people want to min-max a character. They want to be exceptionally great at something or another. And I'd like to say, like, that's not a well-rounded, like, yeah, it'll be fun in this one aspect, but what are you going to do for the other, you know, 3 hours?
3.5 hours
right.
of each game session.
Yeah, like, make a well-rounded character, and if it has experience and improvement to it, you can start to improve other things too. But make sure you make a well-rounded character to begin with. That's my advice, at least.
Yeah, I'm right there with you.
You guys ready for the last question? I mean, it's kind of a tricky one, though. I mean, so let's say like one of my players decided to have his character cut a deal with the big bad end guy or girl and the BBEG, as you guys know, without telling the rest of the group. How would you proceed about that? You didn't tell anybody. Just cut a deal with them.
Well, that player's kind of a dick.
My advice, you as the GM are playing the BBEG. So they're not cutting a deal without anybody. You know about it. And in which case, depending on if it really drives the plot forward or not. Now, it all depends on the spirit of it, I guess. If it's being done because this particular player really does want to be a dick, as the GM, you can just be like, yeah, they just kill you then. I mean,
or congratulations, your player character is now an NPC.
Right.
Like, doesn't everybody have to know about this too, or no?
No, not necessarily. I mean,
there are always times that notes get passed back and forth around the table.
Right. Or now texts.
That
it
too.
used to be
Yes.
notes, and now it's
Shady.
text.
That's pretty shady.
Well, a lot of times you will have people that like have a great idea and they'll text it over, you know, or pass a note or whatever it may be. The big thing is though, like this type of thing that this example of getting in contact with a nemesis, basically, there has to be a pretty damn good reason why that nemesis would want to give this person the time of day, considering they've been at each other's heads for quite a while, most likely.
Presumably.
Right. And if the character has this great idea to try to lull this character into some kind of a trap or something, that's one thing. But if the character's just being like, I want to be a dick to the rest of the group, as a toxic player, in my opinion, I could end it right there and be like, you show up to this meeting and they assassinate you because you're their enemy and you were dumb enough to come there, you know, because you can tell the intent of it. If it moves the plot forward, or if it moves the story forward, or if a character is leaving the group for whatever reasons, like in our Call of Cthulhu game, former PCs make wonderful evil NPCs.
Oh, fantastic foils.
Because they already know everything about the group.
Including your hiding places.
Right. And I mean, they make the greatest foils you can ask for. But again, if it all depends on the spirit of it. If you have a gamer who's just like, I'm going to cut this deal that benefits me.
I'm playing the Punisher, so
right. Like, to me, it's just like, no, that's that. I would ask them, like, does that sound like it'd be fun if this happened to you? Like, we're all here to have fun, right? Like, there's not a competition. This isn't like, you know, there's no winner in this game. Like, it's just
and it really, typically in that situation, the player's trying to figure out some way to just make everybody else not have fun.
Right.
for their own advancement.
And we got into this before. It's what my character would do. Well, then play a different character.
Yeah.
Or play it differently.
Playing a different character is actually the best answer in that situation, because in my mind, congratulations, your character is either dead or an NPC. So you just got, start rolling some dice. You're making a new character if you want to keep playing.
Right. And again, there's some people that might feel like intimidated, I guess you could say, if you have like that one vocal group player, the one vocal player of the group, the leader of the group, who's just like, I'm gonna cut this deal behind everybody's back, doesn't tell all the other players. It's like, come on, guys, we're not playing real life high school here. We're playing a game that we all want to have fun playing. And if your idea of fun is how do I screw over the other people playing, then you know what?
You're probably not a good fit at this table.
Yeah.
And again, that gets into the whole, it's time for a grown-up conversation about why we're here and what we're trying to do. And maybe this isn't the best use of your time.
Right. And just remember, like, if your player passes you a note and says, my player or my character has done this, and you don't agree with it, you can be like, if he passes a note and says, he made this deal with, I would pass a note back. When did this happen? Because he doesn't have control of that NPC. You do. So you have to be on board with whatever. It's not like if something's going to disrupt your game that much, and that type of thing would.
Oh yeah,
because
there's a give
I know
and
it's
take.
not spelled out in here, but it's very much implied that something nefarious is going on with this person who's wanting to screw over his group. Basically, if he's cutting a deal and not letting anybody know, then okay.
Well said.
All right. Well, anything else for us, Mikey?
No more questions from me. I mean, those were the hard ones.
Anybody watching with any?
No, we don't got
All
any.
right.
We don't got any.
Well, then, thank you to everybody who watched, and thank you also to Immortals Inc. for hosting us.
Yeah, and 2 weeks we'll do our next one. And come on down to Immortals in the basement down here. It's worth finding.
When we were here, just as we showed up, a group of people showed up and they said, I feel like I was on a genuine dungeon quest to try and find the store.
Right.
Yeah, we get that every day.
But come on down to the store. It's well stocked. Plenty of space for anybody who wants to game. Plenty of tables for whatever strikes your fancy, be it card games, board games, role-playing games, or even large-scale tabletop miniatures. Come on down.
And let us know if you've got any questions. We can bring them up in the next show.
Yes.